So you can just pass that around. Darren, go ahead.
All right. How many of you were in here the last session on church planting? Many of you. Wow, awesome. I am super pumped to walk in here and see this many people that have some kind of interest in church planting on a Saturday afternoon in Goshen, Indiana. This is cool. My name's Darren Peachy, and
I'm Jerry Sauer.
Yeah. So, back in the central PA, at least in our little spot, we're having a summer like we haven't had for a long time. And my wife, in a good way. And it's green, and the corn is incredible, and my wife, Karen, is getting tired of me talking about, like, multiple times a day. I'm like, I just can't, this corn's like, oh, it's beautiful, and, you know, it's like growing a foot a day, and the ears are getting big now, and it's like, oh, we got to get the next rain because this is going to be a crop like we haven't had for generations. Well, that might be a stretch. But, you know, it's that kind of year, and there's so much potential there. And she's literally getting tired of me talking about it. And a couple weeks ago, I was reading in Jeremiah. I'm reading through Jeremiah right now. And I just came across this verse. It's, I got it wrote down, 8:20. And it says, the harvest is ready, the summer is past, and we are not saved. And as I was thinking about church planting, and we've got all this potential, to talk about the harvest, and it's like there's this crop, and then to have to say that the summer is past, and nobody or very few have been saved, like that just put a knife in my spirit. Like, we can't let that happen, that the harvest is past and people have not been saved. And I know we can't, God, not everybody's going to be saved, but man, we got to do what we can when the harvest there's so much potential for harvest. So I'm really glad you're here. And I just want to, did you guys do any introductions last time?
No.
I just want to go around real quick and just say your name and like why you're in here. Like what's your interest in church planting? Why are you here? Because I think that's important for us to know as we spend the next hour together. So, just Charlotte, why are you here? Don't say because Brian is.
I mean, definitely have a heart for our community, the lost, and potentially church planting at some point.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Ditto.
I'm with her.
Wanda, why are you here?
Well, I am here because of him, but just having watched what God has done in the last 10, 15 years, it gets addictive.
So you know from personal experience what God can do with a potential harvest.
I mean, I can remember sitting in our living room with one couple to start the last church.
And then what happened?
Well, God brought many more people.
Okay. So you have hope because of God's past faithfulness. And that got you excited.
My name is Stephanie Rikers, and we work with a ministry that plants churches in India, but I guess I'm here just to, I never know. You never know what God might call us to do in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
So we, with my wife here, sort of part of Serving India Ministries, where we plant churches in India, but we are part of a CMC church here at Riverview, and we've talked about as we've grown that at some point we may need to do something differently. So we'd love to see what that would look like here in the U.S. side.
Great.
Lynette Hartzman from Flint, Michigan, and I guess we're here because we talked to Jerry earlier, and he indicated that Flint is a place that has been discussed for church planting, and we have a passion and heart for Flint. The harvest is really ready there, and we'd love to network with people that want to come.
Yeah. I've been to Flint and went to the market, and it's an
You
interest.
need to go north of the market.
Well, I've been there too. Acres of concrete with weeds growing up in houses that are, anyway.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And I'm Joel Hartzman, and I'm here with her, and I share that same passion.
All right.
There's a need, and there's a lot of people that need a church to be a part of.
Yeah, close.
We are Travis and Brittany Hogston. We are currently replanting a church a little bit north of Columbus, Ohio. But I have a continued interest in church planting because I think that's to me is where you see the lost and the gospel collide in very spectacular ways. And so it excites me. And I like to just be a part of it even if I'm not involved, just seeing it. And so it excites me to be here.
So it's kind of like things shooting out of the leaf blower, right? There's this collision, kaleidoscope of things happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool, I like that. Go ahead.
I'm Jessica Miller, and my husband Jeff is the pastor at Theme Blossom Community Church, and we've been there about 5.5 years, and it's been sort of like more of like a church revitalization effort, and so there's been a lot of similarities, a lot of efforts that are similar to church planting, and we've talked about church planting a lot, and I also had the privilege of being a part of like a pioneer church planting team in Northern Iraq for a couple of years, and that was an amazing experience. So, yeah, we're excited to see where God will lead us in the future.
Awesome.
She already introduced me and said everything.
You weren't in Northern Iraq. Where were you, Chip?
India.
What did you do there?
Not church planting, but I was like training others to go out and be church planners and stuff. I was teaching missionary training college and also training some other church planners who were already in ministry but had no formal education.
I'm Dave Maurer. I'm the pastor at Pigeon River Mennonite in Pigeon, Michigan. And I'm here because I see the need for church planting. I'm inspired by the vision of the conference. But in all the reading and listening that I do, it seems like it's pretty consistent that it all is in an urban or suburban environment. And I don't doubt that God calls church planters there, but I do doubt that He doesn't call them to the rural setting. At the same time,
Amen, brother.
at the same time, my experience is that it has to look very different, and I don't know what it looks like. And so, while I'm sure there's some principles and realities that translate, I need the translation. What does that mean? What does it look like? How does it function? Because I'm not hearing anyone that seems to know that. And maybe I just haven't heard it yet, but.
You and I can talk afterwards. Larry Kaufman has connected with Ed Stetzer, and Ed Stetzer, who works out of the Billy Graham Center in Wheaton College, is very interested in that topic. So let's talk.
Definitely.
I'm Matt, my wife Tamara Strad. We come from Boyer Mennonite in Middleburg, Pennsylvania, where I'm the pastor. But I stepped into the role as pastor about 1.5 years ago, almost, and kind of here, viewing it kind of like a revitalization, recalibrating the church. Stepped into a church where there was hurt and issues that were prior to us coming, and just searching for a vision for our church, a way to kind of regain that vision for growing God's kingdom.
Awesome.
Why are you here, honey?
I told you you're the designated talker.
Thank you, Tammy.
David Schrader, pastor of Journey Fellowship, Freeport, Illinois. Good question. I'm in a situation that isn't maybe a true church plant, but dealing with some things that are similar. Fascinated by people like Ron and what he does, and what I can bring to our situation there. We're interested in not only being a small house fellowship, but being prepared to encourage other leadership development and seeing more of these small groups develop in the communities nearby.
Great.
I'm Chris Schaefer. I'm the pastor at Pleasant Lake Community Church in Indiana, here about an hour east of here. And at a wonderful church that started 20 years ago and didn't really grow. And in the last 1.5 years, it's doubled. And so we have like 25% of people coming from one direction and then 25% from another direction. And they're just coming from all different directions. And we're adding staff and full-time children's director, full-time youth director, 2 new office staff, looking at expansion. But as I look at actually the community 5 miles ago, I live on a lake in Hamilton, Indiana. I look at it, 25% of the people that come are coming there, and they've been talking to me like, I just wish we had a church in our community that was really evangelical. And really, and I said, well, Williamsburg, let's talk about that. And so instead of just keep on just building and thinking that's the ego direction, is the idea just God wants us to, instead of expanding our sanctuary, doesn't want us to expand into another community.
I love that. You know, let me just interrupt for a brief story. So I was involved in a church in New York that our church vision was proclaiming Christ, training disciples, and raising leaders. And we raised leaders in the church and brought a lot of people into to leadership. And at one point, our pastor was talking about going to 3 services instead of 2. I mean, we had 500 people in church, and I just asked him. I was part of the board, and was just asking him, "Have you ever thought about like taking this community over here and doing exactly what you're saying, rather than trying to grow from 500 to 1,200 in one place, but to just put a And he just looked really straightforward, like, "No, I never thought of that." Well, in the past 5 years from that church, at least 6 different couples who were had credentials with the Assemblies of God, it was a Assemblies of God church, who had pastoral credentials, have left the church and have gone somewhere else to go into ministry. And I really feel like a lot of times one of the difficulties is that if you don't give people who are gifted the opportunity to exercise their gifts properly, if you try to hold them in, it's self-defeating. And if you release them, you find the ones and release them, I think God makes up for it. So anyway.
Build kingdom, yeah.
I'm Boss Joe Walters. This is my wife Debbie from Dayton, Mennonite in Virginia. And our story, I would say, is a lot like this gentleman's. We've been blessed during COVID. Our church is growing pretty dramatically. We have everything from Old Order Mennonites to Kurdish refugees. Just had the privilege of baptizing a Kurdish lady about a month ago, and another one has requested baptism. I say all that to say this.
Jessica's coming.
Our church is filling up, and I'm like you. I don't think we need to build on or add services. Got a lot of young people with leadership potential, and at some point in the next few years, I would love to see us find another church in the community. We live in an area that's full of churches, but sadly a lot of them are dying. And yet there's a tremendous amount of people that are looking for truth and hunger for the Word of God.
Sounds to me, Buff, like you got some older people that got some leadership gifts too. So great.
I'm Daniel Migera from Tanzania, attending Rosedale. I'm a pastor back home, working as a church planters trainer, community transformation, and reaching out and reach people. I'm here because of the passion and call of planting churches and trying to see and reach people reached out, and the gospel share those people, and that's what I'm doing back home.
Great.
My name is Matt Zook. I'm the senior pastor at Bethany Mennonite in Hartville, Osteron. And I am here to learn and observe, see what it's all about. That's what I'm here about. A heart for unreached people. I think there's a lot of them around our community. So yeah, just here to learn.
Great. David.
David Coaksmeyer, Steel City Mennonite in Dublin, Pennsylvania. Here, obviously, I have a heart for church planting and really thinking about multi-site services.
Bill Everly, Associate Pastor at Pigeon River in Pigeon, Michigan. I'm here because there's work to do in that community.
Good reason.
And those people need genuine love and genuine accountability. And we need to be able to prove about how that's possible.
Todd and Amanda Waugh from upstate New York, up in Watson. I would say we have replanted a church. We don't have the facility, but that's not the church. But we are there. I would say even with Dave, it's a rural area. No stoplights, one gas station. It is different than a lot of the models people call ready for the cities. I'm not Ed Stetzer, but I'd be interested in being part of this conversation as well, because it does look different, I think, than some of the mainstream books and ideas that you read as far as rural, when you're, redneck out in the middle of it.
We don't got lines on our roads.
I think one of the passions for me is just what the local church has been to me, the grace. I think I've most tangibly experienced the grace of Christ through the local church, and I want other people to experience that. And I've seen what a local church in a small community does in that community in so many ways, how it blesses it. And John Wesley's, let's put churches in every little community there is. I like that.
My name is Jim Hirschberger. I'm from Virginia. I'm not part of the CMC network. I'm part of Virginia Mennonite Conference, but I pastor at Mount Clinton Mennonite Church, just west of Harrisonburg, Virginia. It's a church I've been there 2 years now. It's a church that went through a rough time 4, 5, 6 years ago. About half the congregation left, so we're about 70 people now or so. It's a church so we need, I'm thinking about this revitalization and kind of thing. The church is an interesting church for a variety of reasons. It's an old church. It has had an interesting prison ministry over the years. For instance, we have a fellow who just baptized about 2 years ago who came out of jail, meth addiction. And then there's a group of us now that are working with what we call the open table model, where 6 of us in the church are meeting weekly with a young woman that just got out of jail. Again, meth addiction. We talk about rural areas, issues in rural areas. Some rural areas have these issues of addiction, of a whole variety of addictions. And so I struggle with some of these ideas about becoming like a contemporary worship service church, where you get a bunch of really successful sort of yuppie type, really successful people who are just fresh-faced and professionals and are grabbing life, by the horns. And then this significant sector of people in our society who are bruised and wounded and broken. 90% of the men in the jails in this country come from homes where they had no father. 90%. That's a lot of people. And if you live, anywhere you live in this country, you can see, I don't care if you're rural or urban. So I just struggle with this thing of, is Christian, is God calling, and I'm not saying this is very bad, I'm just saying, is God calling me in our church to try to work more with people who are coming out of jail? Because we have, in Virginia Mennonite Conference, we have quite a successful prison ministry. We're sponsoring people, chaplains in jails and so forth. And so I have this opportunity in my church to do this. And I have a great willingness of people. There was no problem getting 6 people in my church to do this. And they're all busy people. They're teachers and social workers and nurses, and they're just eager to do this because they see this in the people that they're working with. Children raised in homes, single-parent homes, meth addiction, other kinds of addictions, people that are just broken and bruised and wounded and beat up by life. And yet it's a different culture, coming out of all that kind of life is, this fellow that that we baptized, he's had an amazing journey, but it has been like, it's like for him, it's been like going to a foreign country. Like me going to Nicaragua when I was 21 and learning Spanish. It was like that kind of a shock for him to come out of jail and meth addiction. And then through the power of the Holy Spirit, granted, all that's great, but this has been a tremendous shock for me. And I think the church has a role to play in walking with the bruised and broken and shattered lives in this society. So I don't know, I'm just working with these ideas as I listen to you guys, but I really appreciate everything in the last session and looking forward to this session.
Mike?
I'm Mike Baker. I don't know where I'm from anymore, but I currently call Columbus home as of like a week ago. I will be starting with RI here at the end of the month. I'm here for a couple reasons. The very first conversation I ever had when I met my wife was on church planning and missions, and we've been married 21 years, and that's never actually happened yet. And then Darren brought it up like a year ago and kind of stirred something in us, and so, yeah, what does that look like in relocating to Columbus, and there's so many refugees people and just so many, like we're the only white people in our neighborhood, and like that feels like home. And then the other reason is I also was an EMM missionary in West Africa and still serve as a regional rep for the area. And a couple of years ago, the pastor over there had this vision, this dream that the church would get really, really dim. And then it would just, it was like in his dream, like the light got really dim, like almost went out, kind of like Preston was saying yesterday about blowing on the embers. And then the light exploded. And the Mennonite Church West Africa, the church has exploded in the last couple of years. And they've planted 3 churches in the last 6 months alone, but they're like, we have no idea what we're doing. We're just sending people out 2 by 2. And so there's churches meeting retreats, there's churches...
Wait, like they're following Jesus model?
Right.
Instead of like...
So basically about daily, I get phone calls from my brothers over there saying, train us, disciple us, send people, help. And so just trying to glean anything I can, because unfortunately none of you speak Creole in the room, and so I have to translate and send these things over. So yeah, just glean what I can to give and to type. Obviously not everything will be transferable, because it's one of those areas we have to go because Zoom doesn't work there. I mean, like the internet barely works there. So yeah, it's a twofold. What does God have for my wife and I, and then how can I equip these brothers who, regardless, are just sending people out 2 by 2 and planting churches, but they desperately are begging for training from CMC and RI and anyone at this point that would be willing to go over there and train them.
Zach Miller, my wife Aaliyah and I live in Plain City, Ohio. Associate pastors at Shiloh Mennonite Church, and yeah, we've been talking about church planting there for the last little bit here, and excited about that. Curious what that looks like for us as a couple possibly, but as a congregation as well. So looking forward to hearing stuff from you all.
Jono, serving in Morocco, and hear a lot about movement, disciple making, like all contexts overseas, and so just curious to hear what people are talking about here, what's happening here. So.
Darwin?
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I'm here. After I listened to all those answers, I'm wondering what I'm here for. Actually, I was thinking when I was hearing others talk, that Jesus said, I'll build my church. And he didn't say stand by and watch, but he actually called us to go out with him. And that's a pretty amazing thing, that he would die for a people and said, you go help bring them in. And that's a tremendous responsibility. And so I was thinking about growing up, Dad and Mom helped to plant 2 churches that I remember. And so we're currently at the Pike Church thinking, how do we plant a church? How do we become part of a church plant? And frankly, I don't know how. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Caleb Reed from Phoenix, Arizona. My wife and I run Aim Right Ministries out there, which is a nonprofit youth ministry working with at-risk youth. We've been doing that for 13 years now, and just have a heart and a passion for our neighborhood and our city. and want to see whole families changed and transformed versus just the youth, and see a complete neighborhood transformed with the power of the gospel.
Daryl Driver, pastor of Word of Grace Church, a relaunch in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I think church planting is a tremendous opportunity to reach the community and make disciples, and I would love to see as much of it as possible.
And Daryl and Travis are going to be leading the next section on kind of relaunching, right? Yeah. Steve?
Steve Troyer from Pike, where Darwin's at. Here to listen and observe. And I think Darwin explained it well. We have a Colombian family with us as we speak. They're here at the conference, actually. So we're trying to see if there's possibilities there with a Hispanic flank somewhere. Or listening and observing, seeing what we can do.
So I remember the first church planting meeting I went to. The church planting team had done a survey of all the pastors in CMC, and they actually came up with a number that day, that a goal of planting 50 churches by 2030. As I look and listen to you guys today, like actually, I'm starting to believe that can happen. There is so much passion and experience and love for people in this little room. I'm just a little bit overwhelmed. Let's do it. Let's do it. And one of the things we've been realizing is that, and we've heard it going around the room, there's not one model that's going to work everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we're recognizing that. And so we're trying to find our way. And I'm just going to let Jerry talk now, because he's got all the answers. But I'm telling you that the last 20 minutes has stirred my soul like I wasn't quite expecting. Go for it.
Yeah, well, normally I like to be like the enthusiastic guy, but today Ron took care of that. So I'm going to try to continue with the interactive part of this. I mean, we've talked about this already. Who builds the church? Scripturally, who builds the church? Jesus builds the church. What are we commanded to do?
Be a witness.
Be a witness, make disciples. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not going to put everybody on the spot this time. I want you to tell me, personally, who is somebody in your life right now that you are discipling? So I'm going to give you, I'll talk first, give you a chance to think. But right now I have a young man from Rwanda that's kind of living with me. We met him a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago. We got a call from a pastor in Michigan who had met this guy on the bus and said, this guy Shema is moving to Ohio, and he's like a lost sheep, and he needs help. And he had just called us, and so I looked him up and met the guy, and we kind of started talking to him. We brought him to church. He's the first guy that our church has baptized. And I mean, this guy's got struggles in life. But I mean, I love him, and he's just a guy that has really tugged on my heart. I'm working with him personally, just trying to disciple him, teach him what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to have faith in his life, and what it means to have some discipline and have some order to his life. And that's someone I'm discipling. So I want to hear, who are you discipling in your life? Don't be shy.
Well, first and foremost, I'm discipling my children.
Yeah, amen. Same here.
And then from there, there's several different young men that I meet with on phone or Zoom or whatever. But my kids first.
In my observation, Mike has great relations with his kids. And they're on a mission with him. So.
Nordine, my employee.
Good.
I feel like I'm discipling my elders. I have a 24-year-old elder who's been apprenticing, and
just walking with him as well as the others and just training them to be overseers of the congregation, of the people.
We have a discipleship house for men coming out of recovery center. I've had past struggles with addiction, so that's something I feel passionate for. So right now Chris is there and just walking with him, and that's exciting.
I've got a young man, Albert, who I meet with weekly. We just read scripture together, pray, eat lunch, share with each other. He's come out of a very chaotic family situation.
I meet with a guy named Dana weekly, and we're working our way through what's called the Purple Book. Probably somebody here's used it, and it's a pretty helpful little beginner's book.
I meet with Tabitha, and we're also going through the Purple Book.
Good.
I have 4 young men back home in Miatu. They have a passion for Christ. I'm trying to research them. Sometimes I'm having Zoom call online when I'm here, trying to talk to them about Christ, show them how to imitate Christ. And sometimes they feel like reaching people out, though we are reaching the unique tribe known as Hadizabeh House. We have almost like 100 people right now. But specifically I'm dealing with those young people because they need to go out and reach more people out. So I'm trying to help them know how to imitate Christ, how to build and strengthen the relationship with Christ.
Anybody else? We'll cut this off unless somebody.
Debbie and I, about a year ago, we talked about for a couple of years starting a men's and ladies Bible study in our home. Last winter, we finally jumped off the cliff and did it. We went from after Christmas until April, and we're planning on starting up again this winter. Just one of the young men that was in my class recently made a commitment to Christ and was baptized. Some of them are solid Christians, some of them aren't believers that are just searching, so it's been a real blessing for both of us.
Good. Well, I forget who was somebody in the ministers meeting was saying this yesterday. But if you try to make a church, nothing may result of it. But if you try to make disciples, a church may well emerge. The core of what we need to do is to make disciples. But as Ron has kind of alluded to, we have a vision as a conference to mature and multiply. As Mennonites, we have tended to emphasize the maturity part more than the multiplication part. And we have tended to emphasize the gifts that are more on the shepherding teaching side of this APEST assessment. Now, I'm assuming that everybody's at least somewhat familiar with apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. That idea of the gifts from Ephesians chapter 4. We as Mennonites like to have good community. Community is one of our strong suits. We like gatherers, people who counsel and love on people and shepherd them into the flock. We're not nearly as good at the sometimes called the ape side of these, the apostle, prophet, and evangelist, the people that are a bit more loud and outspoken and visionary. And so, a couple of years ago, we had a meeting out at the Bible College that involved people from several different Mennonite and Anabaptist conferences. It was Brethren, it was Mennonite. Keith Weaver, who is the moderator of Lancaster Mennonite Conference, LMC, was there. One of the things he was lamenting, he said, in Lancaster Conference, over the past 40 years, we chased away all the apostles that came to us. And you saw this in guys like Larry Kreider that started Dove Christian Fellowship. You saw it in Lester Zimmerman, who started Petra churches. I mean, you could just go down the list. People who were raised in the Mennonite church, but they're the kind of guys that are a slight irritant to the pastor who's a good shepherd and teacher. They're always a little bit more forward-looking. They're telling you kind of, what's wrong with your church? Or what's wrong with your vision? Or why aren't we doing this? And they get annoying.
Sorry.
And we need to be ready to identify these people, to bless their gifts, and to launch them into ministry. Because people with these gifts are going to be much more typically successful in starting new works than those whose primary gifts are shepherding and teaching. Shepherding and teaching can come alongside once a congregation is there and can keep it going. But we need to do that. Now, what do you need to do if you want to plant a church or you start to sense that God's leading you in this direction? I've asked Darwin to share a story with us that he shared at the CMC office about 2 weeks ago, because the story that he shares is the model that we would love to happen frequently in our churches. This is what we would love to see happen. So Darwin, go ahead and share the story that you told us that day.
Okay. So sometime in the late 1940s, a man at the church here in that now, came to the leadership of the church and told them he felt that he had been praying and he thought God was calling them to pursue ministry in southeastern Kentucky. And so the leadership had no warm feelings about that at all. So they said, well, maybe we should pray about that. And so they did. And I don't remember how long, it seems like 2 or 3 weeks, they said, let's pray, let's devote ourselves to fasting and prayer, and let's come back together and we'll see what we've learned. And so they came back together, and it was decided among that group that, yes, maybe God was opening a door down there, and they should honor this man's request and go check it out. So they sent 2 people down, if I remember right. They sent 2 people to southeastern Kentucky without any idea where they were going. And they drove around down there and stopped at this little store along the road to, I don't know what they were looking for actually. But they stopped there, and there were a couple of women in the parking lot talking. And they just asked them, struck up a conversation with them, and said that they were down just looking around there. And these women said, we've been praying for somebody to come and start a church down here. And so they took that as the leading of the Spirit and went down and they eventually started 2 churches there in that area. So that was the vision of one person that kind of exploded.
So you guys who are senior pastors here, who in your church has been irritating you? Not somebody who's irritating you because they're worldly or because they don't have a passion for the Lord, but who that has a heart for the Lord, that's on fire for Jesus, has been an irritant. Just kind of bugging you about stuff. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? We could be reaching this community. We could be reaching that community. Start to take notice of that. Honor their gifts. Honor the fact that God might be calling them to do something that's a little bit different than what your regular congregation is called to do. So, one of the things that we've talked about as a church planting team, there's always a question of how should we begin to launch new congregations. In order to reach our goal of 50 new congregations, or maybe better stated, to have 160 thriving congregations by 2030, we're not sure that we're going to be able to start at the top and plant that many churches and raise funds to do a top-down model that would reach that kind of a number. We would really like church planting vision to rise up within congregations. We would like congregations to be just hearing from the Lord, the Holy Spirit speaking to me. I really need to reach out into this community. This thing that we were hearing about, there's a bunch of people from my church that come from, 25 minutes away, and they want a church in their community rather than having to drive this far to church all the time. Maybe a church community that you just drive by and somehow God speaks to you and says, this is a place where a new church would really be great. Maybe there's a cluster of churches. I mean, some of our congregations are in areas that have 2 or 3 or 4 Mennonite churches in the area, or even CMC churches in the area, that churches could come together and gain a vision for planting in a new community. Now, I believe strongly that most of the time God starts with impressing upon a person. The guy that used to lead our mission board, David I. Miller, you saw his son last night diving into the pool, if you were here for the session. So he had a sign on his desk that said, "For God so loved the world that he didn't send a committee." And so, and I think it's true most of the time that God puts a calling on someone's life. That oftentimes it's an individual that just senses, this is what God is calling me to do. Now, we believe that calling, we're not interested in lone rangers that have no support and have no team and have nobody that's working with them. We want churches to respond the way Pike Mennonite did, that, well, this guy came with a vision. I don't even get where he's coming from, but I'll pray about it. I'll spend a couple weeks, I'll even fast and pray about it as a congregation, seeking God. Could this possibly be from God? We want to see support from the congregation. We want to see affirmation from the congregation. We want to see a congregation that's ready to launch people into ministry and support what they're doing. We would love to see clusters of churches. Now, we went last fall. So we've had 2 summits. The first one we had was February of 2020, just before COVID hit. We had one at the RIC in Columbus, and congregations came from multiple different locations, and we talked about things there. But then following up from that, we went to upstate New York, where Todd is located, and talked to the congregations there, and really spent a weekend with them kind of seeking the will of God. We didn't come in with a big agenda, like, we sense God's telling you to do this. We tried to hear from them. Let's pray together. Let's seek God. Let's hear, what do you think God is saying to you? And there's a model for vision casting that we use. I think a consultant gave this to us that we had brought in to do church planning, but it really just starts out with, where would you like to be in 5 years or 10 years from now? Like, what's your long-term vision? And then it just kind of cuts back from that. So if you want to have this vision to what you're going to experience in 5 years, what do you need to do in the next 2 or 3 years? What do you need to do in the next 6 months? What do you need to do in the next 30 to 90 days? And it's really like, what is God calling you to do? And as we worked through that model and people prayed about it, the congregations up there came up with this vision that they want to have, 7 thriving churches? 8 thriving congregations in that area. I mean, right now there's 5, and at least one of them is not really thriving. So part of that vision was, we want to plant a new church in Harrisville, New York. Part of it is we want to get involved in this Spanish ministry. Part of it is Living Hope that's going to move to, it's moving to Watson. It's really going to need to take off. And so the whole vision that came out of that was just amazing to us. And we kind of, in the office, wanted to steal what they said, because their idea of, we want to have 8 thriving churches, we said, that's a really good vision. Let's steal that. We want 160 thriving churches in CMC. So my point with all this is, one of the ways you can clearly get involved, we would love, as an organization, to come and meet with you for a weekend and discern together what is the Holy Spirit saying to the church. What is God saying to us? How is He leading us? How can we get involved to help you fulfill the mission that God's called you to do? If somebody wants to do that, talk to us. Talk to me, talk to Darren, talk to Brian. We'll arrange it. We'll come and spend the time with you. If you have people that are more individual, maybe the church doesn't have a vision for it. Now, I'm part of a congregation that really my son is instrumental in getting started. At the time, we were attending London Christian Fellowship. He was there, and between London Christian Fellowship and Shiloh, they were the official launching churches of the church plant. But the vision was really with my son and the group of young people that were part of a bridge program that they were doing. That's where the vision arose from. The congregations that were sending just said, God bless you, but it wasn't really like there was a huge push from the congregations. If you have somebody in your congregation that has that kind of a vision, I'm just encouraging you, call them out. Call them out. Affirm their giftings. Don't put them down. Don't say, sit in the corner and be quiet. You're causing too many waves here. We have people that want to mentor you. Ron is an experienced church planter. Multiple times has planted churches that are thriving congregations today. Would be happy to mentor young church planters and walk alongside them and give them encouragement and teaching along the way. We also have financial help that we can do. So right now we have about $180,000. Some of it is still owed to us because it's a mortgage that we're holding on a building. But we have money in a fund that we are ready to invest in new church plants. And the way that we do that is going to be to come alongside the church planter. It's going to be matching funds that we give. And in order for someone to qualify for this, part of that is they need to go through an assessment process and have to be approved. You have to have the support of your congregation, your home congregation, obviously. You need to have people that are part of your team, but the church planter assessment is a very important component of how someone gets authorized to go and launch a church on behalf of CMC. So I know that we don't like to talk too much about the assessment, right? We don't like to give away too many of the secrets of what's in there. I'm just going to ask Travis. So Travis and Brittany have gone through this. Did you have a positive experience with this, or was it a gut-wrenching experience that you never recommend to anybody else?
Like hard stairs. Very challenging, very, intense. Loved every minute of it, though. Fantastic thing. God showed up, and really since then, that was almost like a launching pad spiritually for us for the past 6 months, 8 months. And so I'd say if anyone's interested in church planting, or you guys have people in your congregations who are, send them through that, because it's going to weed out those who shouldn't be doing it or aren't ready, and those who are, it's going to give them the tools, it's going to give them the outline to make them successful. And you just can't beat it, especially if you're a little bit younger, and most churches aren't that encouraging when you want to leave. And so to have a group of people rally around you and give you that kind of love, it's great.
Thank you. I wasn't sure what he was going to say.
It's awful, don't do it.
We really believe that it's critical in church planting to build teams. And whereas we feel strongly that people with the ape side of the gifts are maybe more likely to be the lead church planter, we feel like people with all the gifts need to be part of the team. You can't have a team of people that doesn't have anybody who has the counseling heart, the shepherding heart. You can't have a team that doesn't have teachers who are grounded in the Word. You can't have people that are just, full of energy and ideas and never stick to a track. You need somebody that keeps them on track. So we need all the gifts as part of the team, even though we might look for the lead church planter to have the gifts that are a little more visionary. And seeing into the future. I want to just stop here and give you a chance for questions. If you have questions of us, like, I think I might know somebody, I think I might know a community, talk to me practically. What do you need? Ask away.
I'm entirely new to the CMC. We've been here a year and a half, and this is the first time we've been together. Coming out of Virginia Mennonite Conference and MCUSA, it's beautiful to hear about somebody who has a vision, not to just increase who they are, but to increase it by 30% of what exists right now. But I need to understand that vision more fully. And I'm working at that. That's a huge reason why I'm in this room with you. But I just really, I want to hear more of the testimonies of, Darren saying, I went to the first meeting, and in that meeting it came to light that this was what we're supposed to do. For me, the pragmatics of how that came about, just that makes me, it's wonderful. And I need to bathe in that water. Our community is very rural. It feels pretty isolated. And then on top of that, you shut us all down with COVID in a state where the governor was particularly on top of it and concerned. So for me, there's a whole lot of background I just don't know. And I'm super excited about what I see. I want to cultivate the depth of the vision so I can hear it for myself. And I think there's a lot of times when we just sort of take for granted that everybody knows everybody and everybody knows what's going on. And so I don't want to, I also, if this isn't the arena, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, but I really want to hear those stories. Okay.
I'm going to write on here. The link to our prayer meeting that we have every Thursday morning.
You gotta get up before breakfast.
Thursday mornings, 6:30 to 7:30 a.m. Eastern time. Sorry for you guys in Arizona. That would be a real challenge, I think, for Caleb to join us. tinyurl.com/CMC-CP for church planting/prayer. One of the best ways that we feel that you can get started with knowing us, knowing our vision, is to come and just pray with us. Because we have a group of, right now, usually 8 to 10 people, somewhere in that range, that meet most Thursday mornings and just pray for things. Tonight in the service, we're going to do a small demonstration of this for like 10 minutes, kind of, what's a Thursday morning prayer time look like? We're going to give a 10-minute demonstration in the general session tonight, just to show you what we do. Most of the time we just have a passage of Scripture. We read a passage of Scripture. Sometimes there's prayer points underneath of it, like how does this passage relate to church planting, so things that we're praying about. If you want to catch a hold of our passion and our vision for church planting, this is the place to start. And we believe that anything that starts in the spirit world needs to start with prayer. It needs to start with the foundation of seeking God, that just crying out that Jesus is the one who builds the church, that it's not based on our strategies and our cleverness and our finances or anything of the sort. It's based on the power of God moving in our lives and the power of Jesus to transform dirty, rotten sinners like me into people who love Him and seek His face. So this is where I will really encourage you. If you are interested in this and you want to get to know us and what we're all about, join with us and pray.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Not a question, but just a comment. That his question just reminded, or took me back several years to when the ministerial body of CMC, we wrestled with who are we, who is CMC, and what is our mission. And out of that came this vision to mature and multiply churches. And so all these things have been growing out of that. And one is this church planting movement.
Yeah, and just to emphasize the point, we've probably all done pretty well over the years at maturity. I mean, most of the time you find that people in our circles, if they're dedicated church members, are really seeking to follow Jesus in their life and aren't leading double lives and doing outrageous, sinful things. We've discipled people pretty well. What we haven't done well is to bring in those from outside. And so I don't know if you guys read The Beacon. I wrote an article in The Beacon that, God's given us a 330-acre farm. There's 331 million people in the United States. He's given us a 331-acre farm, and we're most of the time farming one-third of an acre. That's the Amish in our community, because that's the easiest people to get to join our Mennonite churches. And that's a problem. We need to be stewards of the entire population that God has put in our midst. And that includes immigrant groups that come from countries that are closed to missionaries. It includes just people from different ethnic backgrounds, like Hispanic, or the biggest one in our country, that have moved in mass and are just part of our communities. But it also includes people that are the hipsters, the ones that you're not quite sure your church wants to reach. It includes the rednecks. It includes the people that are meth addicts. It includes the people from broken families and are coming out of prison. It includes people of every stripe. We need to be responsible to proclaim Jesus to all of them.
Who wrote that article?
Oh, that's the one I wrote in the Beacon. Yeah, if you read it, I don't know. But anyway.
I would just say, you're talking about maturing. I think one thing that I would say is we have lacked in maturing or discipling people to be disciples. Like, I think there is something that's been missing there in modeling, going out, using your life as an instrument where you can be seen and interact with others. I haven't seen that modeled well in the churches I've been in.
Well, so let's hit on that point just a little bit. I've heard this quoted in Mennonite circles multiple times. Something that I don't know if St. Francis actually ever said or didn't say, but it's like, it's quoted to him. Preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary. I just don't believe that. You read Romans chapter 10. What does it say you need to do in order to be saved? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and then believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It's with the mouth that you confess unto salvation. And so the idea that we have to verbally confess Jesus and not just depend on our good works in order to point people to Jesus is a very real part of our discipleship that has lacked. And it's a good point to emphasize. A true disciple recognizes that we have to confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and invite others with our lips to follow him.
I was blessed with how many of us were talking about discipling our children. And I think I started thinking about this more since the day in March of 2020 when we decided that we couldn't meet together, and it was before our group was doing the Zoom, and I was just given ideas for what people could do in their homes, in the meantime, and I started thinking about each of those households and where this would be more easily done some places than in others. And it's something that I've thought a lot about since, our parents' ability to lead worship and to be the church in our homes. And what played out after that was the whole lockdown and everything, and just the realization that what we thought about for years is here now. We have to really be flexibly, we need to be flexible about being a church in any setting. And it's produced a burden in me about encouraging parents to become comfortable with discipling and leading worship in their homes. I think it would do two things, and here's kind of the question for you guys. How much time should be invested in that, given that it would not only help them be the church in their home, but it would also maybe help kind of create a climate of more ease or more willingness to think about church planning? Because I think we're kind of in this situation where people have gotten used to kind of abdicating that responsibility and letting other church leaders do it. And maybe it's some kind of exercise on kind of a weekly basis that helps people become more easily in tune with this, saying, hey, we can do this. We're doing it at our homes on a weekly basis. Why not plant a church in this community? And so, I thought how much of my responsibility as a pastor should just be simply encouraging parents to do church in households,
It strikes me as I hear you saying that, one of the things that I'm wrestling with a little bit is the dynamic of passion that needs to be present for those things to happen. And the reality of our lack of persecution in our context and the impact that has for creating that passion. And at the Pastors Conference in 2020, when Nick Ripken was there, one of the stories that he was sharing, and it's in his book that he's written, is about the Russian situation and a man who began teaching his kids at home the Bible that became a church that grew and grew and grew to the point that he was in prison because he was leading a church, and he didn't even know he was leading a church. And he argued for the fact that it wasn't a church because it didn't have this building, it didn't have this...
Didn't have a steeple, didn't have a...
But the government you would recognize, that's a church. There's this push and pull reality with that, of that model being there, and I think that's got a lot of potential with it. And without some movement of spirit or some push of culture against us in a way that we actually accept that we're called to do that, then how do we actually take that on for ourselves? I can't help but think that part of the reason that God has allowed the pandemic to happen and what it did was to force us into a position of taking on new ways of doing things. And yet, the majority of conversations that I'm having with my people are, we have to get back to how it was. And we are fighting and we are clawing and we are pushing to get back to how it was, when how it was had its good, but it wasn't working, or we wouldn't be having these conversations. And yet and I'm as guilty as anyone else, please don't misunderstand me in this, but we're working so hard to get back to how it was that we're missing the opportunity to embrace the new. And if we're this upset about this level of persecution compared to what we hear Nick Ripken talking about, I can't even imagine what God may be getting us ready for if that's what this is. But that I'm not praying for it, I'm not asking for it, but that may be what it really takes. And if there's another way, let's find it, let's do that. But historically, this is an oddity of not being a persecuted church. And look at the decline that happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. Well, I want to respect our time a bit. I want to finish up with prayer here today. And Lord, I do want to pray that you renew our passion for reaching our friends and neighbors for Jesus. That we renew our passion for being in love with Jesus and seeking his face. We pray for a fresh outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon CMC congregations. We want to pray that when we get together, there would be an anticipation, that there would be a manifestation of your presence and your power, that there would be a worship that is in spirit and in truth, that there would be a word that is proclaimed with power, that there would be people whose lives are transformed and who are going out into their families, into their communities, into small groups in their homes and being the church and proclaiming Jesus in everyday life with those they work with and those who are in their sphere of influence. God, we cry out for this. Renew us again. Renew us again, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.